So Climate Fact Checks is a part of Factor Center Sri Lanka, an IFCN certified organization. Our latest venture is into climate fact checking, where we strive to bring attention to the facts rather than fiction in the climate change media narrative. So as we all know, climate change threatens people in various ways, including food and water scarcity, increased flooding, so many natural disasters, extreme heat, something that we're currently facing at the moment, more diseases, and also economic loss. So it is actually considered as the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century, according to the World Health Organization. So what do we do at Climate Fact Checks to minimize this? So we are an independent, unbiased digital platform bringing attention to facts rather than fiction in the climate change media narrative. So we have a dedicated team of environmental journalists trained in the field of fact-checking, certified by the IFCN Code of Principles, working in tandem with various climate experts from around the world. So we also have an in-house expert from a leading scientific and industrial research and frontline environmental organization in India. So our main mission is to provide the general public with scientifically sound and trustworthy information in terms of climate change narratives on the internet. So we are here to detect misinformation and disinformation related to climate and climate change and bring out the truth through a standard scientific method with the help of experts. And we place it before our readers in a simple, easy to read manner where everyone from any background can grasp this information and make sure that they move forward with correct information when they're sharing content online. So we also, in addition to that, we also strive to disseminate climate change and other related information in the form of pre-bunking. So this means we're trying to develop mental antibodies within people where they can naturally, eventually detect misinformation on their own in the future. So talking a little bit about some of the work that we have done, our organization initiated somewhere June last year, and so far the included in the work that we have done our publications, which is our main focus. So far we have published almost 250 plus articles in the form of fact checks that are based on misinformation that are going viral on social media. We have also written feature articles and also different explainer articles based on trending topics regarding climate change on the internet. So we publish these articles in English, and we also translate them to 9 different languages, including Sinhala and Tamil. We also recently published 5 abstracts at the International Conference for Climate Change. So based on the research we do to get our articles published. And also recently we launched our chatbot, the CFC chatbot, where anyone with any doubt or doubtful information regarding climate change can come to us and inquire about them. And our team is dedicated to bringing the truth behind this information and clearing out those doubts for you. Let me quickly play the video that explains how the chatbot works. So we will send you the link to our WhatsApp chatbot on the chat box, so you can all join us via that link and clear your doubts regarding any doubts regarding climate change on social media. Just give me some time. I'm having trouble with the slide. So in addition to the publications, we also have done several documentaries. So these documentaries are based on some of the investigations that we have done to research topics that we write on. And some of these investigations are on the events that we have coordinated, gotten involved in, and also visited to give it publicity. And also we do videos based on most of our trending articles as well. You can go onto a YouTube page and check it out. So recently we did a documentary on legalizing cannabis in Sri Lanka. We did a river cleanup along the Mahavali River, and also we participated in events related to Meteorological Day that was held recently. And there are some of the pictures from that here. And also, since this year, we are focusing mainly on awareness, and today's workshop is, today's webinar is a part of this awareness project, where we're trying to expand the awareness regarding climate change and related misinformation among the general public. So we are mainly targeting undergraduates and school students as well. And also through these webinars, we try to get hold of as a bigger audience as possible to educate regarding climate change. So I hope you follow our work on our social media pages, and also stay tuned with the Climate Fact Checks pages so that you know what's going on in the future. So now I will introduce to you what you have all been waiting for. So today is the Earth Day, and this year's theme is Invest in Our Planet. And it is focused on engaging industries, institutions, governments, and businesses to take action, and also accountability towards protecting the Earth. So with us today is a climate activist, a dedicated climate activist, Melani Gunathilake. She's a climate, social, and political activist and the co-founder of CAN Sri Lanka, Climate Action Now. And she has been working in this field for almost 10 years, working with community mobilization, social enterprises, and businesses that aim towards making that sustainable switch, and is concerned about social and environmental sustainability. So without further ado, I would like to hand the powers over to Melani Gunathilake. Melani, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Kitmi, and thank you for having me as well. So I think given the topic today about today being the Earth Day, and we are going to be talking about accountability, it's quite important that we not only hold ourselves accountable, and we also identify who are the key players and who are the key actors when it comes to climate change, and who holds bigger responsibility when it comes to climate crisis. Right? So, and also just to give a little bit of a background to the work that I have been doing, I've been working with CAN Sri Lanka, Climate Action Now Sri Lanka, and I've also been working with Good Market and Extinction Rebellion Sri Lanka as well, where we have organized several volunteer events to combat waste issue in Sri Lanka, and also issues like deforestation, some of the government, challenging some of the government decisions, all of that. And as I moved forward with work, what I've realized was that when we fight for climate and the environmental justice, fighting for human rights, and sometimes political activism are also inevitable. Because unlike other areas, when we talk about climate, it is all encompassing. It has all of the factors that includes social, political, and economic factors within it. So that's a little bit about how I started started focusing more on environment at the first, but ended up having to focus not only on the environment, but also on social, economic, and political justice as well. So I'll move towards the presentation. So let me know if you have any questions. And please don't hesitate to stop me from anywhere and ask questions. I'd rather we have a discussion than just me talking. So please don't hesitate to stop me anywhere, or else once the presentation is done, there will be a question and answer session as well. Right, Kitney?
Yes, that's right. And if you have any questions in the middle, feel free to put it in the chat box as well, so where we can address them at the end of the session. So we hope to have a longer discussion as well after this session.
Okay, brilliant. All right. So when we talk about climate change, we hear lots of different words, right? So we hear about global warming, we hear about emissions, we hear about sea level rise, extreme weather conditions, deforestation, fossil fuel. So all of this. So the thing is, there's like lots of information that comes with climate change, because some of this research has been done for a really long time. And also the impacts and the causes of climate change are interlinked. So because of that, the messaging around climate change can get really tricky. And because of that, it's also quite possible that we don't really identify the key players, especially when it comes to accountability. Right? So I will try to break this down as much as possible. Still, there will be a lot of information to discuss. First of all, I mean, if you remember 5-6 years ago, when we spoke about global warming, that was the that was the topic. We used to talk about global warming, but after a while, the messaging around global warming changed to climate change. So I have listed down what global warming is and what climate change is and what causes either of those. So basically, global warming is part of climate change, and global warming is one of the biggest drives of climate change. So global warming mainly refers only to the gradual increase of the warmth of the Earth's surface temperature. But when we talk about climate change, that is long-term change of the global weather patterns, and that goes around to say the gradual, that is more on the long-term changes, not only on the global changes, but also on local levels as well. So even in Sri Lanka, we can very easily identify when there are changes. If you remember before 2004, before tsunami, how our weather patterns was drastically changed after that. So these two are interlinked. And also the main thing is to remember that global warming is the biggest part or the biggest component of climate change, but it is not the only part. So when we talk about the messaging around climate change, it's also important to understand when did we first started paying attention, or when did we first started learning about climate change. So in 1824, a French mathematician, Joseph Fischer, he spoke about climate change, and he said that he was 80% certain that human activities are causing the Earth's atmosphere to warm. But since it was not 100%, it wasn't considered as scientific evidence, and it wasn't adopted as scientific evidence either. And then in 1912 was the first published article about that linked burning of coal and release of greenhouse gas emissions to the temperature rise on the Earth. So when did we first, when I say we, I mean humans, right? When did we first started admitting that humans are causing the Earth's atmosphere warming? That was 2021, just a few years ago. IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, admits that human activities are driving climate change or the global warming. So that was about 100 or 190 years after the very first notice about climate change. So when we look at IPCC report, this is considered the main official report that talks about scientific facts about climate change, and also that suggests what policy changes are needed and what we should do and what are the targets that we should achieve. So this year, IPCC report released another report where I have listed down a few key highlights from it. So once again, it admits that human activities are responsible for global warming and that the world must rapidly shift away from burning fossil fuels. So this suggests that instead of depending on fossil fuels for our energy needs, we should be switching to renewable energy as fast as possible. And it also says that looking at the current emission levels, we are set to pass 1.5 Celsius threshold by 2040. So, but it also says that we have a very rapidly closing window to take action, to take impactful action. It also says that we have solutions. We are at a stage of humanity where technology is at its peak. So with the help of technology, we can definitely slow down climate change, but this is but we only have a very small window to take action. And it also says something very important, that is that emissions have grown, but are distributed unevenly. Groups who least contributes to climate change are the most vulnerable. So if you look at countries like Sri Lanka, right, we have a very small population. So because of that, our emissions are quite low. Right? But as an island nation, we face severe threats, and we are one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. So not only Sri Lanka, there are islands in the Pacific, and there are quite a lot of poor nations who contribute very little in terms of emissions, but also are the most vulnerable and are also the most threatened from climate change. So this is a debatable fact, or otherwise can be called a controversial fact, because some of the scientists believe that there is a mass extinction. So we are facing 6th mass extinction. But there's also a counter narrative to this that is considering the red list, citing the red list, saying that, okay, there are quite a large number of species going extinct anyway. But the fact here is, when it comes to red list, it can only take into consideration a notable amount of species. But if we talk about the gradual increase of the animals and the species going extinct, we are definitely at a critical point, given that humans, due to human activities, we have been able to wipe out about 70% of animals only within a span of 50 years. So it also says that 1/5 of the world's countries are at risk of the ecosystems collapsing because of the destruction of wildlife and the habitats. And the 6th mass extinction is driven by human activity, primarily due to the unsustainable use of land, water, and energy, and also because of the unsustainable food production and consumption. So far, about 40% of the land on Earth is used for food production. And even this food production, if you compare with the previous centuries, we have opted out for large-scale monoculture farming where we only focus on one cultivation instead of mixed cultivation. So which means we destroy the natural ecosystem in that area completely and replace it with one single cultivation. So another controversial topic is the Anthropocene. Right? So Anthropocene approach is an unofficial unit of a geological time. So there are scientists who argue for this and who have argued that there are enough and more evidence to say that we have reached an Anthropocene, whereas human activity creates the largest or the biggest impact on the Earth's natural environment and the ecosystems. But the problem here, or the argument here, is there's a debate on when did this period start. Some argue that this period started with the first, Industrial Revolution, whereas some argue that this period starts with the first use of atomic bomb. So in 2016, a group of scientists called Anthropocene Working Group, they came to an agreement that we have come to the end of the Holocene period, and from 1950s onwards, with the great acceleration, a dramatic increase in human activity is impacting the planet. So this is a chart that shows the carbon emissions and the global temperature. So in this, the dark line, you can see the carbon dioxide emissions, and then this on the global temperature. So Industrial Revolution happened somewhere in 1750s, and you can see the gradual increase that took place ever since, and it hasn't come down. If you compare with previous years, it hasn't, I mean, up to 1960s. So there has been increases and decreases, but since 1750s onwards, it has been gradually increasing. So with the Industrial Revolution, we started burning fossil fuels quite a lot, and also taking fossil fuels out of the ground. So all of this has been causing large scale impact on the Earth and the natural environment that we live in, especially on the atmosphere with the carbon emissions. So just like humans impact the environment or the climate around us, the changes in the climate impact human health as well. So in this chart, you have listed down, so there's the, because of the climate change, there's rising temperatures, there's more extreme weather patterns, and the sea levels are rising. And there's also increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And because of them, there are several impacts that causes several impacts on human health. So this goes to respiratory diseases and diseases like malaria, dengue, and such diseases that can easily be transmitted. And there's cholera and harmful algae blooms. So the diseases that are transmitted through water. And also because of the impact climate change would have on the water and food supply, there could be malnourishment, there could be diarrhea diseases. And also because of environmental degradation, because certain parts of the Earth becoming uninhabitable due to climate change, there are forced migrations, there's civil conflict, mental health impacts, and also something that we are all experiencing these days is extreme heat. Because of the heat, you can see there's heat-related illnesses and death, cardiovascular failures, and injuries, fatalities, and mental health impacts due to increase in weather as well. So the same goes to air pollution as well. So all of these things are interlinked. It's difficult to pinpoint that there's only air pollution in this particular area at this time, so there can only be asthma. It's not like that. So several of these impacts to the climate and the environment happens at a given time, and several impacts can be had on human health because of that as well. So climate change also has an impact on the peace and security on the earth. Because of climate change, there's an increased competition between countries and populations for resources such as land, food, and water. Right? So there can be several number of people being displaced. And with that comes a host of socioeconomic tensions. Right? I think one of the, can name few of the issues that Sri Lanka faced as well. In Ratupaswala, we experienced how there was a conflict because of with lack of drinking water, right? And we have also experienced within last year islands in Pacific Ocean. There are people facing issues. I mean, they're forced to migrate because they cannot live in their islands anymore. Or sometimes some of the island nations, like presidents or the decision makers, have gone to take certain actions that would secure the country's peace in terms of they have settled to register the country in the metaverse, even though the actual land mass is disappearing and turning into uninhabitable lands. So all of this has a larger impact, not only us, but also on our future generations as well. So the reduced access to food, increased conflict over water, and reduced livelihood options, and increased risks of wildfires and air pollutions, human-wildlife conflicts, and mainly the displacement and migrations that could happen because of climate change. So to remind the very first slide where we broke down what climate change and global warming is, I think now we can understand when we talk about climate change that it really means not only the changes to Earth's climate or the weather patterns, or only the warming of the Earth's atmosphere, but several factors that happens because of that. So climate change is also global warming. Climate change is also increased weather events. It's also unreliable yields for farmers and lack of food security. Wildfires, physical and mental health impacts for people, and destruction of infrastructure, health and deaths due to heat, insect outbreaks, increased conflict over natural resources like food, water, and land, mass displacement, sea level rise, hunger, decreased access to clean water. So all of these things are linked to climate change, and climate change is all of this, and all of these things impact climate change on the other hand as well. So we need to understand this interlink between the activities that humans are doing on the environment and how the environment impacts humans as well. So, so I've listed down a few climate crimes in Sri Lanka. So this is to bring our attention into the very first topic that we spoke about, accountability. Right? So when we talk about accountability, we saw quite a few events over the years, which we haven't seen accountability yet. So these are only a very few events from recent past. If you remember New Diamond ship accident, MV Express Pearl disaster that is being talked about a lot right now. If you follow the news at the time, you would remember how the government authorities or the decision makers responded to this particular disaster. And even I remember when questioned about about how to prevent such a disaster in the future, the answers we got from authorities was that there's no way to prevent such an incident, only that we can take action afterwards. So this is quite a massive problem, because when damages are caused to the natural environment, it takes much longer time to for that damages to for natural environment to be recreated, and sometimes it might never be recreated also, right? And especially when it comes to coastal ecosystem of Sri Lanka, it's quite important and it's quite precious, given that we have very unique coastal ecosystems around Sri Lanka's coastal lines. So the damage that was done might not ever be replaceable, but still we haven't even counted our damage yet, and we are yet to even file a lawsuit to claim damages. So this is a very great example of lack of accountability and lack of responsibility, not only from the government, but also from the private sector, the ship owners and the local shipping companies who were supposed to adhere to certain rules and regulations and who didn't. And another example is the beach nourishment project in Mount Lavinia. If you remember, this costed 890 million Sri Lankan rupees, if I'm not mistaken. There were several discussions at that time, but the main thing I wanted to highlight here is this project was conducted without an environment impact assessment. So an environment impact assessment is a report that is supposed to be created before any large scale project is conducted that considered the environment. And this would take into account what could be the possible impacts on the environment and would suggest action to mitigate and control the damages, right? So that was not conducted before carrying out with this beach nourishment project. And if you remember, a few months afterwards, the beach was just as it was before. And it was just a waste of money, according to many environmental experts. And another example is the delay in gazetting the Hambantota managed elephant corridor. So if you remember, in Hambantota, farmers conducted a hunger strike that went on for more than 100 days, asking the authorities to gazette an area dedicated for elephants. This has happened for the first time anywhere in the world. For the first time, there were farmers asking for lands for elephants. But what happened at the end of the day? There were several discussions with the ministers. Some of the ministers visited Hambantota. They gave different promises. But when it actually came out, there were thousands of acres reduced from the initial managed elephant corridor. And according to the locals, they've been given to local conglomerates, the businesses, and sometimes politicians for their own gain. So there was a massive delay in gazetting this Hambantota managed elephant corridor, and the human and elephant conflict stays as one of the biggest conflicts in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka has been placed #1 for most human deaths and elephant deaths due to human-elephant conflicts over the years. And another one is these several unsuccessful attempts of banning single-use plastic. So if you remember, there were several times that the Minister of Environment would say, okay, we are banning single-use plastic. We are banning sachet packets. We are banning certain single-use plastics. We are banning single-use bags. But this has never been successful. So it's important to look deep into the reasons why these regulations cannot be imposed. So one of the problems is, even though rules and regulations are brought up, they are not imposed. They cannot be because of the impact that the private sector would have on the government decision makings. So sometimes known as corporate lobby, because if you know that if a normal person break the law, there will be repercussions. They will be arrested or they will be fined, right? But due to lack of action from the government and the decision makers and the authorities, we've had to ban the same single-use plastic again and again, and still we are not successful. And another one was the repeated attempts of degazetting environmental protected areas. There was an attempt to remove protection from other state forests, which acts as elephant corridors. This was in 2020. There are environmental lawyers currently fighting against this decision in the courts. And there's also the lack of long-term solutions for human-wildlife conflicts. So all of these things goes unnoticed sometimes, and main issue or the main problem in ensuring environmental protection and ensuring climate justice is because of lack of accountability from the government and also from the key players in the climate action. So I've listed down here some of the impacts that human activities have had on Sri Lanka's biodiversity. So not only animals, but also plants. There are several plants and animals that are listed as threatened and endangered, and also elephant population. Sri Lankan elephant is a endemic species to Sri Lanka, and that has reduced from 10,000 to 3,000 within a century. And I've also added another controversial factor here, that is the Sri Lanka's forest cover. So according to publications, or according to Department of Forest Conservation, Sri Lanka's forest cover is 29% or 29.9%, right? But the problem is this last calculation was done quite a long time ago, so even like 10 years ago. But within these 10 years, there have been several number of deforestation incidents that has been reported. So if you take the era or the time period soon after the war, there was rapid development. There was infrastructure development like lands, factories, and agricultural projects. So with all of this, there were several cases of deforestation. Right? But we are yet to take these deforestation events into account and come up with new numbers and come up with new, we haven't done a recent study on what is the real forest cover of Sri Lanka. So if you speak to most environmentalists, what they say is the actual natural forest cover of Sri Lanka is less than 17%. So another argument on this particular topic is that when the government says that our forest cover is 29.9%, they take into account monoculture farms and cultivations as well. But the problem with monoculture plantations is that it doesn't nurture a natural ecosystem that and natural biodiversity. Right? So those are controlled environments, controlled ecosystems, which cannot be considered as natural ecosystems or natural forests. So we spoke about climate, we spoke about climate change, we spoke about lack of climate action. So why climate justice? So like I said earlier, when we talk about accountability, we have to talk about justice as well. So these are two topics that goes hand in hand. So let's see what are the reasons that has made climate justice necessary for the humans today. So climate change has impacted humans and natural systems across the world, but there is a disproportionate impact and also contributions. So like I said earlier, for small island nations like Sri Lanka, climate change is not only a threat, we are already facing it. That is one of the reasons that we have been facing, we had, I think, 3 floods last year, whereas usually it used to be a flood once in 2 years in Sri Lanka. Right? And not only that, this increased heat. So all of this is and also lack of yields if you speak to farmers. So all of these are impacts of climate change where island nations are facing. We are also possibly facing sea level rise as well, but still we don't really have data to back these claims. We have very little amount being spent on studies or research on climate change. So another factor is that the poorest 50% of the global population are responsible for around 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. So which means the richest 10% contribute to climate change twice as much as the poorest 50%. So this was found by Oxfam International, a research that they did in 2021. You can find this information on their websites. And another example on the disproportionate accountability on climate change is indigenous people, who defend and protect about 80% of the world's biodiversity. So when we say that humans have caused climate change, when we say it is humans who are responsible for climate crimes, and when we say it is human activities, we have to be mindful that it is not all the humans. Indigenous people on the local communities have not contributed to climate change as much as the richest 10% has done. So let's look at a little more into global inequality. So during COVID-19, the richest 10 people in the world doubled their wealth, while the poorest people were facing more and more threats. They were facing a lot more health risks. They were facing a lot more environmental risks, and also difficulties in facing these vulnerable situations. But the richest people continue to grow their wealth. So this disproportionate distribution of wealth and inequality directly impacts climate change. How? Because if you look at a rich person's consumption, if we only take something like private jets, right? One billionaire through their private jet travels within a year contribute to climate change a lot more than something a poor person would do. But when it comes to environmental threats and increased weather events and natural disasters, it is the poor people who will have to pay the price. So, and then to talk about corporate accountability. Right. Only 90 companies host 2/3 of man-made global warming emissions. So top 20 companies are responsible for the largest emissions are these. So most of these are gas and oil companies, and which means that they should be taking a lot more action to reduce environmental damage, or they should be taking action to reduce carbon emissions, but that hasn't been the case. So who are to be blamed, right? So I've taken these from research done by university students who recognize that connection between climate crisis to these social, racial, and environmental issues and with governance. So oil and gas companies have distorted the truth regarding the impacts on climate change and the environment. So there has been, when we talk about climate change, it is important that we pay attention to the messaging around it. So if you take certain words like eco-friendly, if you take certain words like sustainability, or if you just take certain sustainable development goals, logos, they all get misused most of the time for marketing campaigns. Sometimes you would see corporations paying massive amounts of money on on publicizing events that they would conduct. But if you look at the impact that these events would have on actually reducing emissions, so actually making, actually contributing positively to the climate, climate action, it is very little. So in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, in Harvard University did a study to understand how ExxonMobil, one of the largest oil companies in the world, have contributed to distort climate messaging and has contributed to change the narrative around climate change, to pass the responsibility on to the people. So, like I said earlier, when we say that all humans are responsible for climate change, we talk about our individual impact. We talk about how we should all be doing our part, right? But if we are all to do our part, the larger corporations who have been contributing to climate change a lot has to be doing their part as well. But that hasn't been the case. And also companies like ExxonMobil have been disrupted climate findings, and they have been funding, they have been investing to on information or the research that suggested climate change denial. So going back to the very first slides that we spoke about, it took 197 years for scientists to admit that humans are contributing or humans are causing climate change. This is one of the reasons. So these counter arguments, whereas we have actual events around us, actual proof around us to understand that we actually, our natural environment is degrading, there were companies that invested on distorting and changing the messaging around climate change. And another thing is, most of the time when we talk about information, or most of these awareness events are conducted by corporates as well. So they're not going to let you hear information that would help you to hold them accountable. So instead, it's quite easy to pass the blame onto the people and say, look, it's your responsibility. Humans are the cancer. That's why we're facing climate crisis. Instead of for corporations to actually take accountability and reduce emissions from their end. And also, when you pass the blame or the onus onto the consumers, we tend to overlook the factors where governments and corporates should be held accountable. Right? We tend to blame each other. And if somebody talks about climate crisis, if you are somebody who talks about climate change, you probably have faced this. People are like, oh, and you're saying that through a computer, you're sending this tweet using a phone. So this doesn't mean, like, taking action for climate change doesn't mean that we completely stay away from technology, or we completely reduce growth, or we go back to the Stone Age. What this means is that we equally share, we all do our part, like the corporates say, whereas the ones who contribute to more emissions should do their part to reduce their impact. And for people to adopt eco-friendly lifestyles as it supports them. We can't expect somebody who use public transport to do the same, take same actions that somebody does when they have a private vehicle. And using public transport, because by using public transport, they already reduce their emissions from quite a lot, right? So I also like to talk about real action versus real solutions versus false solutions. So like I said earlier, businesses shape how we talk about climate change, and sometimes this would stop us from paying attention to what they do, right? Greenwashing is one of the tactics that is being used by corporations to distort messaging and also to greenwash their brands, and spending on impact. Instead of spending on impactful actions, they spend very little on small actions but spend quite a lot on publicizing those. And greenwashing is a term used to describe a marketing tactic that is used to, companies would use to advertise the events that they do, even though the impact on these events are quite small. And this is another one. So we've been hearing, you probably heard about carbon credits, right? So carbon credits mean that, say that we are going to purchase a certain product from a corporation, and the corporation would say, don't worry, you can buy this product, it is carbon neutral, because to compensate for the carbon emissions of this particular product, we have invested on protecting rainforest in Spain or in some other area, right? But last year, The Guardian, along with quite a few academics, carried on a study to understand how much of these carbon credits have actually turned into real action, and how much of these carbon credits have actually supported in terms of protecting rainforest. And according to this study, 90% of rainforest carbon offsets, or the 90% of rainforest carbon credits, were worthless. And there were several issues that they have highlighted in this study. Some of them were about over forecasting rainforest damages, and not really using the funds onto actually impactful events, and several others. So basically, what has been happening all this time was that while our consumption and production has been creating larger negative environmental impacts, we've been trying to invest on reducing the impact. This is like saying that, we are going to destroy a certain part of the environment, but after destroying it, we are going to invest on recreating it, right? So instead, what we should actually be focusing on is changing into new systems, whereas we reduce our negative impact on the environment as much as possible, right? And here are a few more examples on greenwashing. This was a tweet posted by BP, one of the largest gas companies in the world, whereas they say that the first step to reducing your emissions is to know where you stand. So they're trying to come up with a calculator for individuals, for consumers, to find out what our carbon footprint is. And whereas people responded saying that BP was responsible for spilling 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Right? And here's an example from Sri Lanka. So this is from a study done by Pearl Protectors. And according to them, these companies were identified, according to researchers done by them, these companies were identified as the biggest marine polluters of Sri Lanka. But a few months after that, Unilever went and did a social media post saying that they have collected 88% of their plastic waste. But if you go to any beach of Sri Lanka, any natural environment, or just a drain, you will be able to find Unilever products there. And this is another example of bad corporate action, I would say. This happened when a few years ago, Mahinda Amaravira, then Environment Minister, brought up a law to ban sachet packets below 25 milliliters, right? And then what did Unilever did? They sold the same old sachet packets, saying that they should be sold as 2 packets should be sold as 1. Right? So this is clear corporate misconduct. So it is, we cannot accept corporations to do this and also go and place SDG logos on their communication material. Right? And holding corporates accountable means you go and question them, use their social media accounts, talk to them, write to them, email them, and question them about these misconducts. So to come back to solutions, so we spoke about problems and we spoke about false solutions, and we are coming back to actual solutions onto what can we do. So this is according to the IPCC report this year. So according to the IPCC report, we do have solutions for climate crisis, right? We have the technology. We have the technology to find solutions. We have the technology to reduce emissions, but we need to break free from the status quo. We need to move away from the current narrative. We need to stop identify growth or success as with existing measurements, and we need to understand that that change should happen if we are to protect Earth, not only for ourselves, but also for our future generations. So that means changes in the way we do production, food production, infrastructure development, and also changes into our economy as well. And IPCC report also says that the future is inevitably involves more and larger climate-related transformations. So change is going to happen, whether we like it or not, right? So how do we do this change? We must strive for just transitions. And that means the transitions should be just and fair. We cannot go forward where a very small fraction of the human population causes more damages to the environment and the larger number of poor people are paying for the repercussions. And deliberate action is another important fact. Deliberate actions means we discuss and we agree and we explain things to each other and we learn from each other. This doesn't mean that only the academics or only the experts will go and tell the poor people what to do, but there are things that we can learn from the indigenous communities, but we can learn from the local communities because they are the most vulnerable. Because of that, they have faced, because of that, they have found ways to adapt to climate change. So there needs to be a knowledge exchange. There needs to be discussions. There needs to be understanding when we do these transformations. And IPCC report this year also says that investments into fossil fuels must be stopped. And we need to reduce carbon emissions through fossil fuels as much as possible. And it also says that prioritizing equality and climate justice, including gender justice, is critical for the design of enabling policy frameworks. So when we create new policies to face climate change, when we create new policies to improve our resilience for climate crisis, we need to prioritize equity and climate justice and gender justice as well, because women are usually at the forefront of climate vulnerability. And it also says that the world has enough capital to tackle the climate crisis, and action is less costly than inaction. So if we don't act for climate change, if we don't take climate action soon enough, the amounts that we will have to spend on mitigating damages to the society and to our infrastructure is much more dire. And it also says that we need to take action, and we need to take action now, soon. So this is from the Center of Climate Justice from the University of California. This talks about the 6 pillars of climate justice. So all of these areas has to be taken into account when we transition into new models. So that goes to natural climate solutions, social, racial, and environmental justice, climate education and engagement, indigenous climate action and knowledge, just transition, and community resilience and adaptation. So we need to look at all of these factors when we move towards new systems. And we can't leave anybody behind. And we definitely can't leave the poor people or the less advantaged groups, women and children behind. So it's also important that we look beyond solutions, look at solutions beyond carbon, because most of the solutions that we spoke about from the IPCC report focuses on reducing carbon emissions. But carbon emissions, even though a massive factor that contributes to global warming and climate change, is not the only part of climate change. So we need to look at new economic models beyond traditional economic development models, because what created this problem is the focusing only on profits, right? The fossil fuel companies or the FMCG companies that only focused on profit, completely forgetting the environment and the social impact, created this problem. So we cannot go around the same circles and going through the same, going towards the same goals if we want to create sustainable society. So we need to look at broader political and economic transformations if we want to create a sustainable future. And not only carbon emissions, but we also need to reduce social disparities. And we need to make sure that we prioritize people and the planet when making economic, social, and political decisions. And we also need to ensure the rights of the future generations to live in a safe environment in harmony with nature. So if you've been paying attention to some of the fundamental rights in Sri Lankan constitution, we currently don't have, right to life is only very briefly addressed, but we don't recognize it as a fundamental right. And if we are to talk about second generational, third generational, fourth generational rights, we need to ensure and accept rights of the future generations to live in a safe environment in Sri Lanka. And another solution is harnessing traditional knowledge for regenerative solutions. And policy changes should focus on food and seed sovereignty, whereas people of the country should be able to benefit from the decisions made on food systems and seed systems without completely being dependent on multinational corporations. So harnessing traditional knowledge is quite important for Sri Lankan societies, given that we've had a quite rich history with our farming and cultivation. Right? Sri Lankans had this quite beautiful traditions where we coexisted with the natural environment. So it's about going back and identifying this traditional knowledge and improving them with the use of technology. And it also goes into what also we can do is promoting local small and medium enterprises that prioritize environment and society instead of large scale companies that only prioritize profit. So there have been increase, or there have been progress in impactful climate action globally. One of those is intergovernmental discussions on transitioning to a well-being economic model. So instead of the profit-driven capitalistic model, there are discussions on to transitioning to well-being economic models. So I think most of you are probably aware of the old discussion about the left and the right and the socialism and the capitalism, but instead, what we need to do is transitioning into a well-being economic model where we prioritize both people and the planet. I will explain that in the next slide. So, and another progressive climate action is a European law. European Union has drafted a law that require companies to back up green claims with evidence. So if a corporation or a company claims to be eco-friendly or sustainable or green, they have to back up their claims with the European Union if you're selling your products in the European Union. Another one is that UN Human Rights Commission found that Australian government failed to protect Torres Strait Islanders and violated their rights to enjoy their culture and life because of Australian government's climate inaction, because they failed to take action for climate. So because of that, the UN Human Rights Committee decided that Australia should pay compensation to the Torres Strait Islanders. This was a landmark decision. Right. And another one is that in 2022, COP27 reached a breakthrough agreement on new loss and damage fund for vulnerable countries. So this means that the larger scale industrial countries like G8 countries should pay loss and damage funds to the vulnerable smaller nations. Even though the details are yet to be figured out, coming into an agreement on this was considered a stepping stone. And also that in the first Citizens Climate Assembly in Spain, with participation of about 100 citizens, ecocide was recognized as a punishable crime, and a legal definition was given to ecocide as well in the same year, but it's still yet to be adopted by the countries onto the local legal systems. So what is a well-being economy? So I've taken these slides from the Well-being Economy Coalition, whereas countries like New Zealand, Denmark, Canada, and few others are part of. So this is a new economic model that is designed to serve people and the planet, and not the other way around like the current system. So in a well-being economy, the rules, norms, and the incentives are set up to deliver quality of life and flourishing for all people in harmony with nature. So it pays attention to the fairness, participation, nature, purpose, and dignity. So the old way is that responds to common needs that humanity and the planet in ways that do not address the main problems or the heart of the problems. Whereas we think that, okay, by making profit, we can address human needs. So instead, well-being economy looks at a new economic model where this is where people-centered solutions are focused at, and this gears towards protection of the environment and long-term solutions, whereas we take care of our people and the environment first in the first place without damaging it, and then going to reduce the damage, then spending on reduce the damage. Right? So what can we do as individuals, as community members, as citizens? What can we do to prevent climate crisis or slow down climate crisis? Right? So some of the individual responsibilities or the individual actions that we can do are reducing plastic use, right? And we can recycle or collect our recyclable plastic and hand them over to a recycling center. We can upcycle, and best thing is to reduce plastic use as much as possible. And another thing is cycling, taking public transport, reducing our emissions, and being energy efficient, switching off lights when they are not in use, or making sure that there are no leaks in your tap, adopting plant-based dietary habits when you can, and using thrift shops, exchanging clothes. So reducing your purchases as much as possible without being consumed by the overconsumption, overconsumerism. So reduce your consumption, reduce your emissions, right? As from an individual capacity. But the individual capacity of what we can do depends on different communities and their abilities as well. We have to remember that, and this is why it's important that we don't judge each other, that we cannot expect everybody to take individual action the same way that we do. And another thing that we can do is work as communities. You can volunteer with cleanup events, volunteer with reforesting events, anything that would support your community, support disadvantaged groups in the community, And also individually and as a community, we can also demand accountability from corporates, governments, and also media. So how would we hold corporates, governments, and media accountable is through asking questions. We can use our social media accounts, we can email, we can post, we can write to them. And sometimes this could be about false advertisements. We can ask them, if they say that we are recycling 80% of our plastic, we can ask them, show us evidence, right? So if somebody says that, okay, we are eco-friendly, we can ask, how are you eco-friendly? What steps have you been taken to be considered eco-friendly? I mean, like I said earlier, EU is bringing in laws to reduce greenwashing claims, but Sri Lankan government is yet to do that. So we can also push our government to bring up regulations, come up with regulations that would reduce greenwashing claims. And also another one is participating in government decision-making as active citizens, speaking up against injustice, human or environmental rights violations. And when it comes to participating in government decision-making, when it comes to environmental decision-making, one of the ways to do it is taking part in environmental impact assessments, usually when there are several incidents where projects are being carried out without environmental impact assessments. But when they do, the environment impact assessment process allows 30 days period for people to send in comments. So whenever those are available, please take part. Please send in your responses as well. Right. So this is one of my favorite quotes from a lawyer called Gus Speth. He says that they used to think that the biggest environmental issues were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. But he has been trying to communicate for about 30 years, being involved in scientific research and trying to communicate and also bringing laws. But at the end of the day, he has realized that the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And he has said that to deal with that, we need spiritual and cultural transformation. And only scientists and lawyers cannot do that. So it takes all of our participation for us to make Earth a place where all of us can survive, and not only our generation, that couple more generations can survive, and not only humans, but also the natural environment, our biodiversity, insects, animals, wildlife, all of them can survive. So there's enough resources for all of us on Earth, but there's not enough resources for everyone's greed. That quote is from Mahatma Gandhi, and I will stop the presentation from that. So if any of you have questions, you can ask now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I think that was very informative. You spoke about the problem at hand, the repercussions, and what can be done to solve it, and also what we can do as individuals. I think it was an overall, basically covered a lot of our questions already. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and we might be able to unmute you and let you ask the question. So until people come up with questions, I have a few questions that I came across listening to your presentation. So you spoke a lot about greenwashing and how people change the narrative on climate change for their benefit, and also how people misuse global goals just to make them look good. So can the general public, a lot of us are aware of this, we know, we would go to a supermarket, see a product and see that this product is really definitely not advertising what it's actually doing. So is there something us as people can actually do other than, we can refuse to purchase the product, but these are multinational companies. It's not really going to change much for them. So what can we actually do to reduce this and make them feel accountable for these actions?
Yeah, good question. So I think as activists, this is something that we've been sort of trying to do for a really long time. But unfortunately, my personal experience is that the only thing that corporations really care about is when their brand is impacted. So what works, unfortunately, is asking them in public, use your social media accounts, use their social media accounts, post about it. And I mean, this goes to, like, just to say that how far this goes, I have seen single-use, I have seen plastic being advertised as eco-friendly. And when I questioned how are you saying this, their answer is, oh, because this is recyclable. Right? But only 9% of plastic all over the world actually, gets recycled. So that doesn't mean that just because it is recyclable, it gets recycled, right? So I think we need to keep constantly questioning the corporations and the governments, asking them to do better. We have to keep pushing them, and we really have to do this with the brands, because that's where they use their money for advertising. And that's where we'll have to focus our attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think even Climate Fact Checks tries to, in a section of our fact checking is dedicated to, addressing greenwashing, pinpointing and, doing some research and showing how this is not really true. And what you spoke about, it really reflected on a bit on the work that we are trying to do as well. So one other question, so this might not be directly related to climate change, but this is also a topic we've been trying to focus on. So as you said, it's not really the majority, like it's a minority that is largely responsible for climate change. And a lot of the times us as individuals can feel a bit anxious when we realize that we might feel powerless. And it might, there's something called climate anxiety now. It's a trending topic, and it could affect a person's mental health as well. So how can we address this? I mean, especially in the future, because the problem we can see is not getting any better, and this can, we have to address this now. How do you suggest that we do it?
So I think, I mean, this problem is actually real and quite drastic as well. I mean, this lot of teenagers are facing this issue as well, because, they're growing up into a future that is really uncertain, right? So you can actually feel quite anxious, and it can have a really big impact on one's mental health. So one of the best ways to combat this is by getting involved in actual action. And also, I mean, we've been hearing about these gradual actions and little changes adding up to big changes, all of that. But while doing that, if you feel like that's not a, get involved in big action. Join a climate protest, stage, like speak up, and also, try to address where climate injustice is. And also, I highly suggest getting involved in finding new solutions, especially when it comes to problems that comes with social and economic problems. So, I mean, economy is the biggest issue that Sri Lanka faces right now, so is the world, right? So instead of this whole battle between the left and the right and the up and the down, let's face, okay, this is the biggest problem that the humanity is facing right now, climate change. What can we do? Okay, let's try to find a new economic system that really values society and the environment. So learn about it, talk about it, and try to create awareness, so that way you would actually be contributing a lot more onto the solution rather than just focusing on the problem, right? And I spoke about well-being economics, several actually. There are also another methods, another economic models called donut economy model. So you can find this information on YouTube. So we have resources like climate fact check, which can help us identify actual, like real information from misinformation. So, you know, go and try out and try to learn these solutions and be part of the solution. And I think in addition to that, spending time in nature is important too, even though that is sometimes gets difficult if you're living in a city, but at least try to go somewhere there's flowing water, be it the ocean, be it a you know, lake or a river or somewhere. But you know, and look at an ecosystem, try to understand the nature around you. So these things can really have a very good positive impact on mental health.
Definitely. Thank you very much for that. So we don't have any questions from the audience yet. So until then, would you like to tell us a little bit about the work you do with the CAN movement, and, you know, what kind of initiatives have been taken, and, you know, how everybody else can get involved as well if they need to?
Yeah. So Climate Action Now started as we didn't actually plan on starting an organization when we did it. So it started with one of my friends, his name was Gyan. So he had a 4-year-old daughter, and he was really anxious about his daughter's future. And in 2019, when there were climate strikes happening around the world, we looked around Colombo, there wasn't any strikes or protests happening in Sri Lanka at that time. So he reached out to me and he was like, you know, do you want to do a protest? And I was like, okay, why not? Right. So we drew this, like, you know, boards at our place, and, you know, got, I think, about 30 boards or so. And we did stage a small protest at Vihar Mahadevi Park. And so to publicize the event, we needed to create a social media account. And that's how we started Climate Action Now Sri Lanka initially. And along with that, so far we have done several cleanup events, but we don't limit them only for cleaning up. And we also do brand audits with those events. So basically say that we do a cleanup project in Mount Lavinia Beach, we would demarcate an area, and we would also weigh, we would segregate types of different plastics and weigh them and take an audit on the brands. So if it's PET bottles, we take an account of, okay, there were 50 kilos of plastic bottles we found this day from this particular place. And within this, we have this many from brand A, this many bottles from brand B, this from brand C, like that. So we, in addition to that, we have done, we also did a cleanup project in out of Colombo in an elephant corridor, whereas we actually accidentally stumbled upon massive amounts of labels of world-renowned clothing brands. So, you know, we try to raise awareness on that as well. Unfortunately, there was no any legal action we could take within Sri Lanka. And in addition to that, we've done reforesting events. We have done awareness raising events. And we are planning to create few more awareness programs, and also especially focusing on EIA process and to increase youth involvement in environmental decision making. So that's going to be our next big project at the moment, hoping to sort of summarize environmental impact assessments whenever they come out, making them easy for people to understand using science communication, and helping them send in comments as well. So if you want to reach out or get in touch with Climate Action Sri Lanka, Climate Action Now Sri Lanka, we are on Facebook and on Instagram as well, and on Twitter. Our handles goes as CAN Sri Lanka, CAN Sri Lanka. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that information would be very useful for a lot of us. So we have one question from the audience. I will ask that, and then we can wrap up after. So this question is from Malik Fernando. So he's asking, he's actually complimenting your presentation, and he's asking whether like the general public should participate in the battle against climate change, and that is our responsibility. But at the same time, there are certain multinational companies who should be held accountable, and to actually get them to, pay for their actions, there needs to be policies in place in any country to, control this. And in the Sri Lankan context, where is this gap and how can we address this?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and thank you so much, Mali, for asking this question as well. So basically the problem in Sri Lanka is definitely policy, but there's also a quite large component where with corruption, right? So when it comes to government decision making and policy decisions, they are largely impacted by corporate lobbying. So this is somewhat of a known truth in Sri Lanka. I think this is the reason that we've had to ban single-use plastic more than 3 or 4 times now. Right? So one of the policies that we can push for is extended producer responsibility, EPR policy that is being brought by the Environment Ministry at the moment. So what this suggests is that the largest polluters will pay, or they will have to pay for the pollution that they create. So this goes on to mostly onto polluter pay principle. It currently is only a driving principle in Sri Lankan law, but we don't have proper mechanisms at the moment. So because of that, even the extended producer responsibility is currently only going as a voluntary project. So that is one. And another one is even for greenwashing, I told you earlier in the presentation that European Union is bringing in laws to regulate greenwashing claims. So this is also something that we can focus on. So as youth, if we can get together and present private member bills to regulate greenwashing, I think that would actually accelerate climate action in Sri Lanka, because only thing worse than inaction is false claims on action. So and there are and also in terms of waste management, there are a lot of action that the government can take and the policy decisions that can be taken. So push the government whenever possible, and however way you can, I think for our generation, best thing or the easiest way we can do it is through social media. But also apart from that, there are climate protests, sometimes organized by our organization, Can Sri Lanka. We've organized climate protests, and there's Extinction Rebellion, Earth Guardian Sri Lanka. So all of these organizations, and also Center for Environment Justice, EFL, Environmental Foundation Limited. So all of these organizations take action and they push for policy changes. So you can support them as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. I hope that answered Malin's question. I think with that we can end the session today. I think that was a really fruitful webinar. It was so much valuable information was shared, and I think we had a fantastic discussion at the end as well. So thank you very much, Melani, for your time and everything that you shared with us. We really appreciate it, and we hope to collaborate with you in the future, hopefully someday with climate fact checks as well, because this is the kind of awareness we are hoping to create. I know it's just the foundation, but we have to start somewhere. So with that, I thank everyone else for joining us, and stay tuned for future webinars, and we will keep you posted on those things on our social media pages. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.